I grew up in a small suburban town in Michigan. My parents' property bordered a state forest that was typically pretty deserted. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to go in those woods. I was 15 years old at the time, and I was a female, but I was far from naive. I had a job as a cashier in town, and in the summer, both of my parents and older siblings worked days, so there was no one around to give me a ride to work. If I wanted to get to my job, which started in the afternoon every day, I had to walk. If I traveled the roads, it would take me out of my way. It was about 3 miles into town, but if I cut through the secluded woods and followed the train tracks into town, it was only about 2 miles, and it was significantly cooler, a bit flatter with less sun. Ignoring my gut, I took the same shortcut at the same time every day, which was a big mistake. The shortcut was a deer trail through the dense woods and rolling terrain, which went directly into town. By the time I got to the train tracks, I was a long way out from any houses. It was just woods in all different directions. One day, I was alone in the deep woods on my way to work when I heard a strange jingle. I put my hands in my pockets and stopped walking. The change jingling lasted for a brief second longer and then stopped. I couldn't tell which direction the sound was coming from because of all the little hills and dense trees, but it sounded very close. Thinking, or perhaps just wishing, I might be imagining the sound, I tried again. I started walking until I heard the change jingling again, and then put my hands on my pockets and stopped walking abruptly. Once again, I heard the change jingle for a second more before it stopped. I knew right then I was being stalked. The train track, which also led to a clearing, was maybe 100 feet ahead, up a steep embankment. My instincts told me to walk fast, but not to run, and not look behind me. I sensed that there was someone immediately behind me, but my heart was racing, and had no time to process the information. I walked as fast as my little legs could. There wasn't any point in screaming for help. No one would have heard me anyway. Then, there was something on the trail ahead of me. Lying on the path I was walking on was a page ripped from a porn magazine of a woman, fully naked. I didn't get a great look at it as I power walked over it, but later thinking about it, I recalled the page was crisp and carefully laid on the path facing my direction. It wasn't there the day before. Someone had placed it there, anticipating my arrival. They'd probably been watching me for days, or maybe even weeks. Further down the path, there were even more pages set out like some sort of pornographic breadcrumb trail. I walked right past the magazine pages. Finally, I made it to the steep embankment along the tracks. I climbed for my life. When I got up the tracks, I ran. Only then did I look back into the woods. As I was running, in the bright sunlight now, my eyes had a hard time seeing down below into the shadows of the woods, but I saw something big move and heard twigs breaking. I just kept running. It was a good half-mile from that point to the closest road that passed over the tracks. As I got closer to town, there were more houses and people, so I eventually calmed down. I never reported the incident, and I didn't tell my parents about it until years later because I thought they'd ground me for going into the woods. I never took that shortcut again. I've always heard that the human body goes into a fight or flight mode when you are truly scared. It was around 11 p.m., 2 blocks from the Lloyd Center Mall in Portland, Oregon. I was home alone in our bottom-story 2-bedroom apartment. I had just woken up from a nap. I look at the time and see that my boyfriend is going to be off to work soon, so I decided to walk over and meet him. His work was only a few blocks away. Normally when we leave, we exit through the glass patio door that's in the living room. It faces the street outside, so not thinking anything of it yet, I exited through the patio door with the shades closed and hopped onto the railing on the sidewalk without locking the house up like we'd done a million times before. As soon as I begin my walk, I start to get a strange feeling and see a stranger beginning to walk towards me. The street is silent, lit only by street lamps. The stranger gets closer. I see he's wearing what looks like a button-up Hawaiian shirt and a large straw hat. I veer off onto the other side of the street and begin walking faster, and then he follows me, getting closer and closer to me until I finally turn my head and he's right behind me. With no words, he reaches his hand towards me and tries to hand me a food stamp card. I told him no thank you, I don't need it, but he wouldn't move. So frightened, I took the card, told him thank you, and rushed away as quickly as possible to my boyfriend's work. Once there, I explained what had happened. I kept telling him that I didn't lock the house door, and he saw me leave. He's gonna go into our apartment. He told me not to worry, and that there was no way that that would happen. So after he closed up shop, we went to the grocery store and grabbed a few things for dinner. I began to calm down now, but still couldn't shake the feeling that he was gonna be there, waiting around in our apartment. We start to walk home, and I keep looking around, looking over my shoulder, paranoid that he was gonna creep up on us. And then it happened. As we approached our apartment, about a block away, I saw it, the shadow, through our patio door. It was the big straw hat. He was inside our apartment. I started to shriek and cry, and my boyfriend ran up to the patio. The man must have saw him coming, because he came out of the door and sat in one of our chairs. "Call the cops," my boyfriend yelled as he pulled out his knife and approached the stranger. "What are you doing in my home?" The man said nothing. He just sat there quietly as we walked up. I could just see him staring at me. The man started to move. He stepped over the railings onto the sidewalk. My boyfriend stayed with him as we waited for the police to arrive. A neighbor who was walking his dog happened to walk by, and he walked me to my apartment door, inside the apartment building, and made sure that nobody else was inside and waited with me. When the cops finally arrived, they arrested the man and took a look around our apartment. It looked as though nothing had been touched. Nothing was missing, so I could only presume that he was there only to wait for me to come in alone, and then what? Who knows what he might have done? A neighbor in a house across the street came out and told the police that the strange man had been hanging around their home. He kept knocking on the door, saying that his name was Angel and that he needed to come in. Was he delusional? Was he on drugs? I really don't know. I peeked my head out the door to see what was all happening and saw the man in the back of the police car. He began to stare at me with this awful smirk on his face. And to this day, it haunts me. I'll not go to sleep without knowing for sure that all the doors and windows are locked and the shades are closed. I worry that this man will find me again one day. This is a true story that happened when I was 6 years old. My family lived way out in the country on a very quiet road in the middle of Pennsylvania Amish country. There were maybe 5 houses on our road, and we knew all of our neighbors. It was the kind of place that nothing ever happens except for the occasional cow escaping its pen. It was winter and very close to Christmas. I remember it was lightly snowing outside. I couldn't sleep for some reason or another, and was sitting on the couch with my mother while my dad sat in his recliner across the room. It was about 10 p.m. and we were all watching TV, when suddenly there was a loud knock at the front door. This scared the crap out of my dad, who looked over at my mom and said, "Who could that be knocking this late at night?" My dad got up and looked out of the window and said to my mom, "There's a guy standing out there." My mom was apprehensive and said not to open the door, but my dad decided to do it anyway. My dad opened the door, and he said that there was an older man standing there, approximately in his 60s. Now remember, it's winter time. This man was not wearing a coat, no hat, no gloves. He was only wearing a wife-beater tank top undershirt and tattered jeans. My dad also noticed the man had no shoes on. The man looked like he had blood on his shirt and his hands. This man didn't say anything when my dad opened the door, and he just stood there, his head down, looking at the ground. My dad said, "Can I help you?" The man slowly looked up and stared blankly at my dad. My dad asked the man again, "Can I help you?" The man finally said, "Could you please call the police? I just killed my wife." My mother heard this and screamed. At the same time, my dad slammed the door and quickly locked it up and immediately called the police. While we were waiting for the police to get there, my dad looked out the windows and couldn't see the man anymore, so we figured he ran off. The police were there in about 15 minutes and searched around a few minutes. My dad opened the door once the police got there and let him in. He spent about 10 minutes talking to the police and explaining everything that had happened. The police then went outside and searched all around the house again. A few minutes later, the police came back in the house and asked my dad if he was joking around. My dad told them again what had happened, and my mother told them what she saw and heard. This is what the policeman told us. We can't find anything outside, no footprints in the snow, no car tire tracks, no blood, nothing at all. There was absolutely no evidence of anyone being outside of our house. My dad and my mother just looked at each other in complete shock. It hadn't been snowing hard enough to the point that it would have covered up any tracks in the snow that quickly, or hidden any blood that was in the snow. This was a man that we'd never seen before, who wasn't dressed for the weather. My dad said that there was no car outside when he opened the door. My parents and the police never did figure out what had happened, but both of my parents still talk about this story to this day. It's been almost 30 years.